Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. This video covers an important topic that affects both the Isle of Man and the wider community, terrorist financing. I'm joined by Julian, and together we are going to discuss the Isle of Man's first standalone terrorist financing risk assessment and what it means for us. Hi Julian.
Hello.
So, Julian, let's start at the beginning. Why has the Isle of Man conducted a terrorist financing specific risk assessment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Every jurisdiction is expected to understand and manage the risks associated with money laundering, terrorist financing, or proliferation financing. The international standard setting body, the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, expects this. And as a jurisdiction, we previously did risk assessments and published them in 2015 and 2020. These were the money laundering and terrorist financing national risk assessments. But since then, it's evolved, and there's a better understanding of the risks with particular sectors and some of the threats that we face. And this is why we have taken the time to look at the terrorist financing risk assessment, and there'll be a number of other national risk assessments that we put out in due course. Mm-hmm. And this just gives us a chance to really, in a detailed way, understand both the threats and vulnerabilities that we face, and therefore what we might do to mitigate those risks. And within the National Risk Assessment, we have recommended actions towards the end. So it gives us a more detailed understanding of terrorist financing risks.
And what are the main goals of this assessment?
Yeah, there are three primary goals. The first is to give industry, the regulators, agencies, a detailed understanding of the terrorist financing risks that we face as a jurisdiction and how to mitigate those. Second is to look at the 2020 risk assessment that we published and give an update on the terrorist financing actions that were within that risk assessment, and there's been a lot that has been done since then. And lastly is to give everybody a detailed risk assessment for them to use within their own business to better understand the risks that they also face.
Mm. What kind of risks are we talking about?
So the Isle of Man is an international finance centre, so we have customers based throughout the world. We have a lot of cross-border flow of money. So the threat we face is not terrorism, fortunately, not terrorism on our jurisdiction, but it is the threat of others elsewhere trying to use us and our structures and our sectors for moving money through and around as part of their terrorist financing that they do. So that is the risk we face. Like many other international finance centres, it's being used by outfits elsewhere to try and put their money through us.
Mm. And tell us a little bit more about how the Isle of Man has gone about assessing these risks.
Yes, we've used World Bank methodology, and thank you to World Bank for letting us use their tools and their assessment. It's a very thorough process. We've used World Bank methodology before. That's what we used for the previous national risk assessments. Alongside that, we've also looked at the other Crown dependencies and how they approached it. And also we've used guidance that has been published by other small international finance centres, and that was really helpful to support and enhance the analysis that we did. I've also got to thank, there have been so many people from the agencies, from government, from the regulators and industry who've all collaboratively worked together over the last year to both do the assessment for this, which comes out in the National Risk Assessment, but also it's a very thorough process, and behind the scenes we have a lot of supporting documents and analysis which has helped us come to the conclusions that we have had.
Sounds like a really thorough process. So let's delve into the threat activity a little bit more. Has the Isle of Man seen any terrorist activity?
Fortunately not. The risk assessment looks at the threats from terrorism, from at a national level of terrorist financing, and we also looked at the sectoral level. It also, for the sectors and nationally, looks at the vulnerabilities as well. So a very thorough process, and that risk assessment then allowed us to do the analysis to see where our greatest threats might be.
And the local threat is low. What is the bigger concern?
So the bigger concern is us being used as an international finance centre as a transit. It's the transit risk. So whilst we do the analysis and look at incoming and outgoing risks, as well as internal risks, the risk that came out highest for us was that transit risk, that risk of a terrorist financier passing money through us, through our structures, onto somewhere else, and us being part of that process.
You mentioned some specific sectors. Which ones are most at risk?
We looked at 4 in greatest detail, and the 4 that we looked at in greatest detail were banking, the trust and corporate service providers, life insurance, and the e-gaming sector. In fact, banking and the TCSP sectors came out in that as having a terrorist financing threat of medium, which was the same as previous assessments. The life insurance sector came out as medium low, which was just down 1 from medium where they were last assessed. And the gaming sector went from low to medium. So within the terrorist financing report, there's sectors, there's a sector section chapter for each of those 4 that we looked at in detail.
And were there any other sectors that you looked at?
Yes, so we then tried to look at most of the other sectors, so be that the non-life insurance, the high-value goods dealers, the legal sector, and less detail than those other 4, but we've done analysis, and in the risk assessment we've covered those. The only ones we didn't were where we're going to do further assessment, for example, for virtual assets, but also for the non-profit organisation sector, so think charities for us. The non-profit organisation terrorist financing national risk assessment, that will follow shortly after the publication of this one, and that goes into more detail just for the terrorist financing risks that our NPO sector may face.
That will be really helpful to have that standalone document. Can you give an example of a typology or a risk scenario that businesses should be looking out for?
Yes. So just on typologies, one of the actions in the risk assessment is that the Financial Intelligence Unit, the FIU, will publish some updated terrorist financing typologies for industry to refer to. But the type of examples we bring out in the report are things like, for example, there's a dormant company which isn't used for a period of time, and then money comes in, it's suddenly activated and money goes out, or where we may have a structure and we just see one part. It's a multi-jurisdictional structure. We see one part and money is then passing through that the terrorist finance is used that go through that. So the banking sector and the TCSP sector may have to be particularly mindful of some of those. In the risk assessment, we bring out a number of other examples. Often we've had to refer to other jurisdictions because we don't have examples here in the jurisdiction, but hopefully for industry, the risk assessment and those examples and case studies that we've included will be useful for them to upskill their knowledge and use those to help enhance the knowledge with their staff.
Absolutely. So what is the overall risk level for the Isle of Man?
Yes, so overall using World Bank methodology, it's come out as medium-low. That is in fact the same as in our previous risk assessments, but it's benefited from a year's work of detailed analysis. The World Bank methodology focused specifically on terrorist financing, so we've got a much more detailed assessment and analysis with a lot of unpublished supporting documents. We're also very grateful to industry who supply a great deal of data either through the AML CFT returns that they do annually to the FSA or the financial flow data that's supplied quarterly, and all the other data that we have access to. So we've got a very rich source of data, a lot of which we've been able to reference and use to support the analysis, and the reader will see that in the risk assessment.
Absolutely. And what happens next?
So industry, government and the agencies have got some actions that they're going to do, which are published in the report. For industry, though, the key thing is to look at their national risk assessment, the terrorist financing national risk assessment, and then think of it in the terms of their own business, because what they have to do is update their own business risk assessment when it's next due, but they have to update their own business risk assessment. So it's very important that they do that, and what the TFNRA will give them is the national picture and the sectoral picture, so it'll help them think about that in connection with their own firm and their own firm's exposure.
Really helpful. And where can they find these risk assessment documents?
So we're publishing them all on the counteringfinancialcrime.im website. We're publishing for terrorist financing 3 documents. We're publishing the full document, the executive summary, and also we've done a key findings document for an international audience. Those are perhaps not so familiar with the island. Simultaneously on that website, we're also publishing an Isle of Man in profile document. We're minded that the risk assessments of this is the first of a number that are going to come out, are of great interest to us locally, but also to an international audience. So for that international audience who aren't so familiar with our island, the Isle of Man in profile document will be a useful document for them to reference, as it may be for some of our own sectors.
Absolutely. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that website when it launches. And it's just for me to say, if anybody has any questions about the risk assessment or accessing the documents or anything else, please don't hesitate to get in touch with the team via amlcft@gov.im, and a member of the policy team will be only too pleased to help. So that comes to the end of our video. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you very much, Julian, for sharing this information. Bye-bye.